arrive when you least expect them. And you want to be in a position you're ready. So, make sure that you're thinking about that next job. And when something is put in front of you, you can say, hey, I can do that.
Holt is shifting full-time to Dateline NBC. The Supreme Court just gave the Trump administration the green light to end legal protections for over 500,000 migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. Liberal justices Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sonia Sotomayor dissented in the decision. And Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated just made history, launching its first UK chapter in London. With 25 powerhouse women leading the charge, they're already serving the community with meals, mentorship, and support for Black-owned businesses. Get BIN News now on demand 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.
The following is a paid program and does not necessarily express the views or opinions of Equity Media, its management, staff, or affiliates of WBOK.
Now, it's the Monitor's Mic with your host, Stella Cement.
Welcome to the Monitor's Mic, where we talk oversight, policing, and you. I'm Stella Cement, your host and the independent police monitor for the city of New Orleans. And with me is Chriselle Williams, our deputy police monitor. This show is your go-to source for discussing policing, law enforcement oversight, and how it all impacts you. From the Office of the Independent Police Monitor, we offer an independent perspective on city government. The Office of the Independent Police Monitor, OIPM, serves as a crucial civilian oversight body for the New Orleans Police Department, the NOPD. We ensure transparency and accountability within the police department by making sure the NOPD follows their policies, abides by the consent decree, and yes, that's still here, and is compliant with all local, state, and federal laws. Our office operates independently from the NOPD and from the federal monitors. What do we do day to day? We take complaints of officer misconduct from the public and from police officers. We review misconduct investigations conducted by the NOPD's Internal Affairs, which is called the Public Integrity Bureau. We are on call 24 hours a day, every day of the year for officer-involved shootings and critical incidents. And we will go to the scene and monitor the force investigation from start to finish. We are advisory members of the Use of Force Review Board and disciplinary hearings. We run the Community Police Mediation Program, and we engage the community to ensure your voice, opinions, and concerns are heard. We, your hosts, are not police officers, but we are experienced attorneys from the criminal legal field, dedicated to transparency and accountability. We encourage you to call in today with your questions, comments, and concerns. While we may not be able to address individual cases, we are committed to following up with you. So with that, let's learn more about today's guest. Chriselle?
Today we are joined by Lauren Sapp. Lauren is an attorney, advocate, and educator. As Deputy Director of the Promise of Justice Initiative, PJI, Lauren assists in advancing the PJI's vision and building and supporting a formidable team to challenge mass incarceration and its myriad harms. Before joining PJI, Lauren was the Director of Student Affairs at Loyola University, New Orleans College of Law. At Loyola, Lauren championed and designed racial equity and inclusion initiatives, managed complex student, faculty, and administration dynamics, and spearheaded Know Your Rights education efforts. Her career also includes being a public defender at the Orleans Public Defender's Office, where she fiercely advocated against police misconduct and illegal detentions. Her leadership extended to hiring and managing trial teams, fostering collaboration, and driving community outreach. Lauren has a Juris Doctorate from Loyola Law School, Los Angeles, and a Bachelor of Arts degree from Loyola Marymount University. So thank you for being with us today, Lauren.
Wow, this feels really special. Thank y'all for having me.
Yeah, we're very happy to have you.
It's been too long since I've seen Chriselle and Stella,
I know.
I have to say.
I know. I'm struggling, honestly, for everyone to know to call you Lauren. I just want to say Sapp. That's all I want to say is just Sapp.
I respond to both. More so to Sapp than Lauren, probably, but either way works for me.
So we want to just start off with the basics and let the listeners get to know a little bit of background information. So you work at PJI, and thank you again for being with us, and PJI for y'all that didn't hear me the first time, it's Promise of Justice Initiative. But what work does PJI do?
So I am very honored to be the Deputy Director of the Promise of Justice Initiative. We are a multi-pronged movement lawyering organization. We do civil litigation, criminal litigation, organizing under the umbrella of narrative storytelling to combat mass incarceration and combat the criminal legal system. We have an amazing staff of lawyers, organizers, storytellers, admin, development. We're a strong team, small team, but mighty. And all of our clients are incarcerated. And we do what we can to remember those folks that people forget about.
Wow, that is a lot. That's a lot. So I kind of want to ask, you use the term storytelling, which I love. I love that term. But for our listeners who might not be familiar with that term as a truly like term of art, it means something. What does storytelling mean to Promise of Justice Initiative? Sorry.
It means narrative change. These times, the climate we're in is a climate that Louisiana has been in for a little bit longer than the rest of the country. And in PJI's view, where a lot of the legal justice reform and justice work is going to come with storytelling. And that's connecting the community with folks that are closest to the issues, that are most impacted by the issues, telling their stories, humanizing the system impacted people. Sarah Gonzalo is our storyteller at PJI, and she does a phenomenal job of bringing the humanness, if there is such a thing, back to the criminal legal system and telling the stories of what people experience, what brings them joy, what brings them heartache, who they miss when they're incarcerated, who they think about, what they want to do when they're out. And it's a way to really connect with people and touch people. In a climate where maybe a lot of legal work may not move the needle, but storytelling always does.
I love that.
I love that too. And I really appreciate the breaking down of silos. Because a lot of silos do exist in the criminal legal system where maybe you're just looking at what happens at one component in the process. And what PJI is effectively doing is telling a larger story. So that way we see how all the pieces fit together and build off one another. And that is powerful stuff. So let's talk about the first part often of this story, which might be an interaction with the police. So I would love to talk about the New Orleans Police Department and other law enforcement agencies, which might be, again, the first part of an interaction with the criminal legal system. In your opinion, how can those policing practices, those interactions, contribute to incarceration rates, to what's happening on the maybe back half of the story?
So I want to start by thanking y'all and the Independent Police Monitor for the work you all do. I know we're all in this, fight together, and it's organizations like yours that can level the playing field and bridge the gap between policing and community. So I appreciate you all for existing, really.
Thank you, and that was not paid.
I love the Know Your Right stuff and talking about the Fourth Amendment. As a public defender, I was able to learn more about it, become an expert in it, and now I just nerd out about it. It's a class I've taught at Loyola. I do Know Your Rights trainings in the community, and there is a direct correlation between how policing exists on the street and how our prisons are full of Black men and women. And it's at every level, right? There's policing, and then there's, detectives, and there's district attorneys, and there's judges, and, it goes up and up and up, Department of Corrections. And at every level, as you mentioned, Stella, silos, these policies are meant to disappear people. And it starts from the outset at policing folks on the street. When Renard's in the room, I want to give him a little shout out. We were talking and preparing for this interview yesterday. I brought up stop and frisk and how that's something that, a lot of the clients I had as a public defender, they became my client, but that wasn't the first time they had an interaction with police. A lot of times police are stopping folks and they don't have anything on them until they get to go home. But that interaction alone can, traumatize someone, stick with someone, and it's at every level. It's all by design. And so as much, mass incarceration starts with policing, and it's rooted in Louisiana government. Obviously we had the exception clause of the 13th Amendment, which made it illegal to own human beings, but it didn't make it illegal for the state to own human beings.
Wow.
And so it's at every level. And I've, met so many impacted people, so many impacted families that it starts with the policing and it goes to the court system. And then, people are forgotten about and disappeared and not talked about enough.
I think that's, very interesting, of course, especially you breaking down how, mass incarceration starts from policing, moving on up through the criminal legal system to the DOC at the very end. But in actuality, again, we bring it back to everything starts at the beginning with the policing. So what police behaviors or policies do you believe can lead to unnecessary arrests or even unjust prosecutions eventually?
Well, not to harp on this point, but, freedom is not a valued right here in Louisiana. It can be taken away for stealing a candy bar. I've had clients plead guilty to 10 years flat for stealing an iPad from someone's car. Freedom is not a value here in Louisiana for freedom of life, joy, whatever it may be, health, education, sustenance, abundance, all of those things. And so what can police do better? That's a difficult question for me to answer because you have to go to the historical root of why the police were created. And so I'm not sure, it's an internal battle I have with myself in doing this work, is if policing can actually be reformed, or do we arm our community with education of what their rights are when they come into contact with police? I've met plenty of police officers that are the nicest folks I could ever meet, friends of mine, but at the same time, policing was created out of slavery and enslavement of folks, and it still operates as such based on who's incarcerated and who's targeted. And so in a reversal answer for your question, Kershell, I've decided to arm the community with knowledge on what they can do when they come into contact with police as far as asserting their rights about consent, searches, and things of that nature.
You just said a lot. So I just want to unpack that for a moment to make sure that I understand and that our listeners understand everything that was,
I'm not telling you anything new, Stella.
No,
Former public defender over there.
No, I'm loving this. And I just think that's really powerful stuff. And so let's take it piece by piece. First, you're highlighting that when we're talking about policing, we're not talking about individual officers. We are talking about a system,
Right.
A system that's been constructed by a society for particular goals. And we're asking, did that system, can it be reformed, or is it going to still serve the original goals that it was created to do? Like, can we have the system of policing evolve with us, or is it just an inherently unjust system because of why it was created? And why it was created was around slavery, around catching formerly enslaved people, and then when slavery was in theory dismantled, policing and incarceration was created in its place effectively. And so these are just parts of our shared history as a country that we know, and now we need to ask, can it be reformed? And what I'm hearing from you is,
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
It's hard. I mean,
That's
and
a
again,
powerful
Stella,
take.
you can relate to this. There's a period, and I'll never forget it. I had about 163 clients at one time, and 9 were white. And so it's hard for me to think that something like that can be reformed when I know white people don't commit more crimes than black folks.
Right.
It's because of how we're targeted. I mean, even, the language around what's happened last week with the escapees from OJC, from the Orleans Justice Center. manhunt, capture.
Yes.
You know, it's all these kind of this wording, this semantics that, you know, it hits me heavy because I'm like, why didn't we capture those kids to get them in school before they were incarcerated? Why didn't we capture those kids to get them the proper health care, food on the table, all those different things? And so would I like a society that can have, you know, obviously balance and, you know, order necessarily? Sure, but not at the cost of freedom of people that look like me.
So, what about the critics that are listening to this and saying, enough about the history? That's not who we are today. We do not have slavery today. Why are you talking to me about something from over 100 years ago when we're supposed to be doing a radio show that's timely and taking up issues that are relevant to an everyday New Orleanian? Can you frame the history as why it still matters?
Yes, I have an exact example for your question. I'm smiling and looking at Renard because we talked about this yesterday. So one of the things the Promise of Justice initiative works on our civil litigation side is what we call the farmline case. A lot of our clients are at Angola Penitentiary, and I want to say the name Angola, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it again, Angola, because that Louisiana State Prison is called Angola because the best enslaved people, according to the people that built the plantation, came from Angola. And the name of the prison remains as such.
Yeah.
And what we discovered through work of our non-unanimous jury work, which I'm sure we'll get to, is that there are people that are incarcerated at Angola that work on this thing called the farmline. And if you've ever been there and you drive up, you'll see men shackled, picking cotton, rotten tomatoes, food that's not used or eaten by them. They're in extreme heat conditions. They're not given shade or water, and they are paid 2 cents an hour. And so none of that stuff reforms you, makes you a better human being, rehabilitates you. Any of the things that prison is, you know, supposed to do, it's to break you down and to remind you that you are not a human, that you do not matter. And the direct correlation to slavery and what enslaved people did when Angola operated as a plantation, which it still does.
Absolutely.
It's hard not to talk about the history when the history is still happening in 2025. And it breaks my heart to think about. But there are people on the farm line as we speak, picking tomatoes and cotton. And, you know, I don't know much about farming, but I do know that we have machines. And machines can do this work. And so what we're suing Angola about is because the existence of the farm line is a violation of the Eighth Amendment. It is cruel and unusual punishment. And there's different ways to operate around the Eighth Amendment. And we make choices as a people, as a society. We could choose to have machines. We could choose to give them classes. We choose to put them out in a field with deputies on horseback and rifles, picking cotton. And it's hard not to think about the history when you say something like that a few weeks ago.
Right. And I mean, describing it is hard to hear, and also remembering, like seeing it, is even harder to digest. Every time I used to go up to Angola,
Traveling back in time.
and then seeing this, and then knowing that not only are they out there in the sweltering heat and have to do this for hours, they then go back into their dormitories with what? No air still. So
No air
y'all
conditioning.
know how Louisiana gets in the summer, and y'all know how it feels here. So that is something that is very, very troubling. And kudos to PJI for taking up that to try to resolve this for these many incarcerated individuals that are affected by this, because plainly it's a form of punishment. And that's not what they tell us that prison is supposed to be for.
And we have a lot of guys, a lot of clients that have refused to do so, to pick cotton, because that's what their ancestors did, and they didn't want to insult their ancestors, and they get thrown in the hole. You know,
And
you
I
get
can
punished for
say
that.
What is the hole? Sorry, just for anyone who's unfamiliar with that term.
It's a place where you go in prison and in jails that you're set in isolation. The time that you get out of your cell is extremely limited, if you get any at all, maybe 30 minutes or an hour a day. And it's a form of punishment for not doing the thing that is a form of punishment. And we have a lot of guys that refuse to pick cotton. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is hard on them. I can say I do have some former clients that I do remember that it was very taxing on them mentally as well, to know that they're in this space and thinking about the history of what that meant, and this is what they're now required to do. And honestly, because I did try to, when I had those recognized that I had those clients that were struggling, try to set a attorney visit once a week at an Angola. So at least that pulled them off the line for that day. But, it's just a hard thing to think about and kind of like, sit with it. And it's just a troubling thing to see and to hear and to know that people are still doing this.
It sounds like the power of being able to understand the gravity of this experience comes in knowledge, in having seen it for yourself or having talked to people who have those lived experiences. But say we have a listener where this is all new information and they want more, or they want to form their own opinion on this, because of course this stuff is always political, it might be on the ballot, or they might just want to take a position, an informed position on this. What would you recommend to those listeners? How do they get this information?
Please tap in with the Promise of Justice Initiative, promiseofjustice.org, at Justice Promise on Instagram. Our storyteller, Sarah Gonzalo, created a documentary on the farm line called End Plantation Prisons, A History of Forced Labor in Louisiana. It's a absolutely incredibly powerful film of stories of people who have now come home talking about their experience on the farm line. And, if you want to watch that film, we do regular screenings in the community, and we'd be happy to screen that film with your organization and provide any information necessary. On our website, we also have more information on the lawsuit itself. And again, our goal is to end the farm line. So right now we're suing for, if it's above 90 degrees, the guy shouldn't be out there. Please give them water, provide shade. And it's small wins, little bricks to hopefully end the farm line once and for all. And I will say that the Department of Corrections, we're in a fight about it, right? Because they want them to go work when it's 95 degrees. They don't want to give them water. They don't want to give them shade. Why?
Right. Why? Those are powerful questions to ask. And I think everyone should be asking a lot of these questions and looking into this, because again, this is our state. And it's being done effectively, in some ways, in our name. So let's make sure that we're all informed about the actions that are being taken on our behalf. And speaking about the actions that are being taken on our behalf, I want to transition to talking about the criminal legal system now. And I want to talk about PGI's work with individuals that are in a different position in the story. They have a different story. They have a different experience. They're not going to be necessarily the story that's captured with all the work around Angola and around mass incarceration, but they do touch on it, and that's our individuals that are affected personally by crime. Those might be crime survivors, victims of crime, or family members of those touched by crime, and witnesses. So what does PGI do, if anything, around survivors of violence?
So I'm glad you asked that question, because a lot of folks forget to talk about victims and survivors of violence, and they're just as important in the story. The Promise of Justice Initiative formerly had a coalition, Louisiana Survivors for Reform, and we worked to pass the Justice for Survivors Act. We've now transitioned that group into what we call Not in My Name. And so, especially when we're rallying around, another one of our campaigns is anti-death penalty work. And Louisiana executed Jesse Hoffman on March 18th, the first person to be executed in over a decade in Louisiana. And our organizers created a group, Not in My Name, which are survivors of violence, that came together against state violence and said, you will not, do not kill Jesse Hoffman in my name, because it's not what I want. And so victims are not listened to by the system itself. You know, as a public defender, I'm sure you experienced this. A lot of people that call the police on your client are calling you. Hey, when's this court date? The DA won't call me back. I don't want him to go to prison. I told them that. All those different things. I mean, in Jesse Hoffman's case, the family members of the victim who was killed in the 90s wanted to meet with Jesse. The governor said no. They did not want him executed, and Jesse was murdered by the state. And so the state parades victims as if we do this for them. But then when you have victims saying, please do not do this in my name, they don't listen. And in Louisiana, and in New Orleans in particular, there's a victim perpetrator narrative that victims are here and perpetrators are here.
Right.
But they can easily be intertwined or exchanged at any point. It's hard for me not to say that a lot of our clients aren't victims too.
Yeah.
And, you know, as they say, hurt people hurt people. And so the line between who's a victim and who's a perpetrator is often quite blurry. And I think our system, policing, district attorneys, do a terrible job of protecting the rights of victims and, you know, giving them trust in the system.
Hurt people hurt people. That's, you know, that's very true. Very, very true. So with all the work that you all do with the victims and the witnesses, how does PJI build that connection with survivors of crime?
So we'll have community gatherings, community circles where folks can share their experience, connect with other people. I believe that solidarity is one of the best things that can come out of our Not in My Name group. And that goes for everything, right? It really got kicked off with our anti-death penalty work for Jesse Hoffman, but even for our non-unanimous juries, we have victims of crime where the defendant got a non-unanimous jury verdict, which if we have time to get into it, and they're saying, don't keep this person in prison in my name. And so we're, you know, connecting with folks. We're trying to create the group, make it larger to stand against state violence, and really allow survivors of violence to have their voices heard.
That is such a wonderful opportunity. If there is someone out there that thinks that they would benefit from this, what should they do?
Feel free to reach out to us on our website. We have a general email and contact button at the bottom to get involved, get plugged in. Again, we're on Instagram at Justice Promise and promiseofjustice.org. We'd love to have you at our next community gathering and hear your story.
Great. I really hope that our listeners take Lauren up on that offer, because this is, I mean, I could not agree more that victims are not listened to. Survivors' voices often get lost in this system as well. So it's really important to take advantage of opportunities to have your voice heard and amplified in a way that is going to be powerful. And this is one of those chances. So you brought up non-unanimous juries, and more than a mouthful. That also is a big concept and a very timely concept. Can you explain to us what is a non-unanimous jury?
So a non-unanimous jury, before 2018, Louisiana and Oregon were the only states to allow non-unanimous juries. Everywhere else, when you're in a criminal trial, let's say you have 12 jurors, all jurors must decide guilty or not guilty. And or if everyone's not guilty, then you are not guilty. And so in a non-unanimous jury, if 10 people say you are guilty, 2 people think you're innocent, you are still guilty in the eyes of the law in Louisiana. And, you know, we can get into the historical context of that. We call them Jim Crow juries. at the Louisiana Constitutional Convention in 1898. This is a quote from the minutes or the notes from that convention, is to uphold the white supremacist race, is essentially what they wanted to do. And at that convention, they created non-unanimous juries. And it's by population to essentially silence black jurors. It was figured out, it was 9-3, and now it's 10-2. And it was determined that based on community census, based on how many black people are registered to vote, et cetera, how many black jurors are likely on each jury. And they determined the numbers in that way. And so it was created to silence black jurors that may not want to vote guilty, because in a lot of cases in Louisiana, the DA looks a certain way, the judge looks a certain way, the attorneys look a certain way, and then the defendant's a black man. And they wanted to silence black jurors to incarcerate more black people.
This is another example of how our history is our present. And we have to understand that's why when people say, but that was so long ago, or why are you talking about, something that we might feel shame about, or we might, now today reject. Why are you talking to me about this uncomfortable history? The answer is, it's still happening. It's not
happening.
our history. It's our today.
Absolutely.
It's just a different label, and now it's a different vote count. So what work did PJI do around this concept?
So I'll get into the weeds a little bit with the cases. In 2020, U.S. Supreme Court made a ruling in a case which y'all are familiar with, Ramos v. Louisiana. And it's a case we helped bring, and that essentially decided that jury verdicts in criminal trials must be unanimous under the Sixth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And after that, from the moment the decision was issued, PJI had a year to file PCR applications for those convicted of non-unanimous juries.
Sorry, what are PCRs?
Post-conviction relief applications. Sorry about that.
No
the
problem.
acronyms. I apologize. It's hard for me to say non-unanimous jury because we say NUJs. And we filed over 1,000 post-conviction relief applications for people that were convicted by a Jim Crow jury. And we were able to get a lot of folks home. The law itself, non-unanimous jury law that was created in 1898, is unconstitutional. And so right now, there are nearly 1,000 folks still incarcerated in Louisiana under an unconstitutional jury verdict.
I'm sorry, can you say that number again?
The number fluctuates. As you can imagine, it's difficult to find non-unanimous jury cases. You have to find jury polling slips. A lot of our clients didn't even know they had a non-unanimous jury. Sometimes the judges don't poll the jury at the end of the trial saying, did you vote guilty, not guilty, who voted what?
Right.
And so it's we calculate nearly 1,000 folks, some people would say more, of people sitting in prison under an unconstitutional jury verdict waiting for a new constitutional trial.
So I know there are probably listeners asking this question because, I've been asking this question forever as well. The Sixth Amendment of the Constitution isn't new. So if it was always unconstitutional under the Sixth Amendment, then it's always been unconstitutional. So why are people still sitting in prison behind an unconstitutional law?
It's tough to reconcile. Unfortunately, in October of 2022, the Louisiana Supreme Court decided not to make Ramos retroactive.
And what does that mean?
Yeah, retroactive. What does that mean?
Retroactivity means that the rule that was passed of saying in 2019 that all juries are now going to be unanimous, PJI and other amazing organizing groups were a part of that effort to make juries unanimous. We want all cases prior to 2019 to have that same effect. And so it's about applying that current rule to the past. And so a case from 1990, 2000, if Ramos is retroactive, then we have to review all of those cases and either give those folks a new trial or figure out a different sentencing resolution. And so that's what PJI has been fighting for, is retroactivity. Last week, or a few weeks ago, we had a bill on the House Committee, Senate Bill 218, which says just that: make unanimous juries retroactive. We made it through the House and lost at the Senate due to extreme pressures from rogue district attorneys in the Louisiana District Attorney Association who vehemently opposed our bill, asserting capacity and cost issues. And I would clap back and say, this is literally your job to do justice, right?
Right.
And justice would be to give our folks a new trial. So we're still fighting. We're gonna, we're looking at avenues of our next steps of bringing the bill back or picking a different avenue of how to get folks out of prison, how to get them new trials. And the loss is still a little fresh, but we keep fighting, keep going.
Can we go big on this idea of when you said, this is literally your job to do justice? What does justice mean to you?
I'll quote Martin Luther King, justice is what love looks like in public. And that's what I think it is, right? Is what love looks like in public. And for me as a public defender, my idea of justice was to bring every party involved, victims, my clients, back to the same or similar circumstances they were before I became involved in their lives. Justice is fairness, it's equity, justice is joy, and justice is love. And there are sparks of that here and there. As tattered as Louisiana's legal system may be, it's obviously a beautiful place full of beautiful, amazing people. And I believe justice ultimately is love and joy at the end of the day.
I can't believe that I'm going to hear something that beautiful, which it truly was. That answer was
justice is what love looks like.
Yeah, but
And
that
I didn't make it up.
but that whole answer around joy and that's gorgeous. Now I'm going to respond with the critic's voice, and I'm going to say, yeah, that is what our society should be. But when people break this social contract that we're all in to do right by one another, and they violate a law and they hurt people and cause very real pain, why are we focusing on them who broke the law and hurt people instead of talking about and trying to protect public safety?
That's a great question. Punishing people after harm does not make us safer. And I know y'all have said this plenty of times.
Say that again.
Dig deep.
But-
Say that again.
Lean on in
But
it.
punishing people after harm doesn't make us safer. If punishing people after harm made us safer, Louisiana would be the safest place in the entire country. I know we say that a lot. Yeah. We're the mass incarceration capital in the world, and we are nowhere near the safest place in the world. So we know it's not working. There are plenty of ways to highlight public safety, and that's access to housing, healthcare, meaningful work, health, dignity, stability of communities, having families and neighbors be free from violence themselves and free from state-sanctioned violence, people treated with fairness. If we move the timeline back to provide those basic level resources for people, I don't think we would be in the situation we are now. And in the same way that the government and the DAs and police say, we do this for victims, we do this for victims, they also say, we're doing this to keep you safe. Do you feel safe?
That's a good question.
I mean, that's a heavy question. That's a very heavy question.
I don't walk my dog late at night.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing in that response is pretty much that we need to start focusing on the root cause of the issues. Like, make sure people have the access to healthcare, as you mentioned. Make sure there are no food deserts, that people have adequate education and rights to education, that we're giving them the tools that they do actually need to survive, or if you want to say survive, or, to make something out of life. We need to stop trying to now figure it out on your own. And then when you're in this situation, now we're going to incarcerate you or grab you off the street, and we're going to take care of everything on the back end. But what about what happened at the front?
Exactly. And that's kind of the narrative I attribute to the escapee situation that's ongoing.
Right.
And the narrative I attribute to a lot of my clients and a lot of people that call the police. You know what you know, and you're born where you're born. And we need to provide more resources for people on the front end to contribute to love and joy and healthy communities.
So when you're saying we need to create resources so that way people can tap in, and when they know what they know, if they know more, then they know better, maybe decisions will be different, and how we engage in our community and what we want from these systems will be different. Is the creation of that stuff, going back to what you discussed earlier with legal education programs like Know Your Rights, is that what you're discussing when you're saying resources, like, information? Is that
It's public education, it's collaboration. People closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but often the furthest from power. And it's about bringing those people in to find the best solution, because who would know better than someone who's impacted by a lot of the stuff we're talking about right now, right? And everyone has their own lane. Y'all do the work, the beautiful work you do with IPM. I have a lane in what I do as a deputy director at Promise of Justice Initiative, and what I do with my Know Your Rights work. And to me, my lane with Know Your Rights work is the public education lane of arming folks with the knowledge. They can take my body, but you can't take my mind. Arming folks with knowledge so that they know what they can and cannot say, what they should and should not say when they come into contact with police, which for certain people in our community is a lot of contact. And not always consensual, and not always something you would want contact with authorities and with police. And so I think at the end of the day, for me, I feel like my lane is public education and pulling in and collaborating with people who are impacted most.
Now, you said that people that usually have like the best solution, and I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing, the best solution for the problem are probably the furthest away from it, right? Like
Furthest away from power.
Power,
Yeah.
right. So, in that vein, then, Zap, what role should community voices, or voices in the community, especially those that have been impacted by policing and incarceration, what roles do they have in shaping police oversight and reforms?
Not a big one. As to policing, I will say for the Promise of Justice Initiative, our clients lead our work. We listen to their voices. The cases we have and the cases we litigate are because our clients told us that this stuff was happening. They said we should pursue this, and we're in it with them. We're in the fight with them. When I was a public defender doing direct representation, I would tell every client, I advise, you decide. This is your life. I will do whatever I can to help you in whichever way you choose. Just let me know what you're choosing so I know how to do my strategy, right? Are we going to trial or are we not? And so I say that to say I'm not sure how large of a role community members have in reforming policing or bridging that gap between policing and communities. I think that's where y'all come in to help bridge that gap. And I think it starts with listening, and not just listening to the communities, but listening to each other, right? Because as we said, policing is an overarching term, but there are good people everywhere. And it's about bridging the gap, listening to each other, and having those conversations to end a lot of the violence that happens in Orleans Parish every day.
So let's pivot to the name of Promise of Justice. What does that mean for policing oversight and criminal legal reform? How can we realize that promise?
I think we have to think about what the negative aspects of policing and incarceration and prisons say about us as a society. And I think what the Promise of Justice Initiative tries to do is reconcile those aspects. Whose humanity do we value? I believe that Louisiana and the government say that some people are disposable or irredeemable than others, that some lives are worth more than others. And it's about how comfortable we are with cruelty and how we as a people confuse revenge for accountability. And that's what the promise of justice tries to reconcile. And that's at every level. And so the Promise of Justice Initiative is post-conviction work. All our clients are incarcerated in prison, not jail. But I highlight that because it's all connected, and it's all connected by design, policing to prison.
Wow, I think you've really highlighted, like, the underscore of this is that systems are another form of public harm. And that when we're talking about public safety,
That's a good way to, that's good.
we're not just talking about what we do to one another as people, right? We're talking about what systems we construct, again, in our name, to serve us that actually is harming us.
Exactly.
And one thing that we always, I frequently say this, but one of the worst things I hear from families is whenever they say, I wish I hadn't called 911. I just wonder what would have happened if I had never called 911. And when you're a police monitor, you don't want to hear that on so many levels. Right. You want people to have faith in systems, and you want people to believe that
Safe.
that they're safe, and that when they're calling for help, that call for help isn't going to re-victimize them. It isn't going to add to the pain, because all we're doing is piling on now, and we're not getting to something closer to accountability, joy, love, whatever. We're getting further away from that. I have to say, this is all really heavy stuff. So how do you stay hopeful? Are you hopeful? I should ask that first. Do you have hope?
And you can attest to this as being a former public defender. We can have this kind of negative, pessimistic outlook on systems and things of that nature. But I absolutely have hope. I wouldn't be here doing the work I was doing unless I had a little bit left, obviously, to keep fighting, keep fighting, keep fighting. And what gives me hope are the beautiful people that I am privileged to interact with and work with on a daily basis. Because I believe that people are good at the outset, and ultimately people are good, and I'll always have hope that things can get better and continue to get better, because what else kind of pushes you when things are built to work against you, when folks like Promise of Justice Initiative, public defender offices are they're supposed to lose, right? And so we have to have hope. And always ask ourselves, what haven't we tried yet? And keep going.
What I always think about, we're supposed to lose. I love that. And I was just going to riff off that because I was going to say that. What I always think about is our best laws came from losing in lower courts first. So the things that end up being the supreme law of the land was the loser often. Quite a few times before we ended up holding it up as our legal truth.
And who made that decision?
Yeah, and why, and for who?
Exactly.
So, if there is someone listening who's as inspired as I feel right now, listening to you, and they're like, man, I want this to be my career. Do you have any advice to them, to the next generation of SAPs?
The next generation of SAPs.
I know, yeah. Let's build a legacy. What's your advice to the law student that's listening? Because I know, I'm looking at our Facebook Live, we have one viewer. And maybe that viewer is in law school right now saying, I want this.
Might be a former student of yours.
Maybe. Yeah. I would say be open to pivoting, right? Which the three of us sitting here have pivoted how many times, right? And so, do something that you're passionate about, do something that you can have a life with, pay your bills with, have a livelihood, and have something outside of all of this, right? The system is built to break you, beat you down, And, you know, you need to have outlets to experience those things like joy and love and health outside of it to sustain you while you're in it. And I think it's important to pivot. You know, I never really had a plan B. I'm going to be a lawyer and I'm going to be a trial lawyer, and that's what I'm going to do. I haven't been in a courtroom doing a trial. I took a few cases pro bono, so I shouldn't say too long ago, but it's been about a year.
Wow.
Before that, it was 3 years that I wasn't in a courtroom. And that's all I saw myself doing. I went to law school to be the next female Johnny Cochran, right? I went to law school where he went to law school.
Such an LA thing
Right?
to say.
I know, right? I drive a white Bronco in order to, you know, a little ode to OJ. But I always say be open to pivoting because you just never know what can come, and try things that you may not think you like, so you don't get stuck in a box, right? I worked at a contract law firm, great people there. It wasn't for me. Worked at an insurance law firm, great people there. Wasn't for me. And so sometimes it's that process of elimination that can kind of get you to where you are. And I'm sure the three of us didn't think we'd be sitting here talking about these things working where we work. Yeah. And so just being open to pivoting, and that there are always different lanes to do similar kind of work and to do the work that's healthiest for you, that you can do good work, feel good about what you do, and have a good life. You know, I would always tell my students, to be good lawyers, you need to be good people. And that's ultimately what it starts with.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
There you go. Chriselle, do you have one?
I always do that. Stella took it right out of my brain. So I'm going to blame her.
Michelle is the one who says it the most.
I said
you stole Chriselle's.
So I just took that opportunity to take exactly what Chriselle
I was like, that's
said.
pretty good, Stella.
And pass it off. Yeah, thank you. I always say that. That's kind of my shtick. I'm always saying it.
Yeah, but that's absolutely true. But yeah, especially having outlets in this type of criminal legal system and doing this work in different avenues, different lanes, public defender, post-conviction, all those things. Please have an outlet. You need it.
Take care of your mind, your soul. And I'm going to push you now on giving some great advice and ask, let's look to some other actors. We do have police officers that listen. We love our police officer listeners. Do you have anything that you would like to kind of give to them? Is there any advice or perspective that you hope they're carrying in their work?
To all the police officers and district attorneys listening.
Yes.
I would say, I would charge them with, remember your why. Ooh. I think maybe not a lot, and maybe this is the hope in me talking. I believe people are good. And I have to think that when someone says, I want to become a police officer, it's because they want to keep people safe. I have to think that when a district attorney says, I wanted to always be a district attorney, it's because they wanted to bring justice to their communities. Obviously, the historical context of the roles of policing and district attorneys is created and rooted in discrimination of enslaved people, and they still operate in those functions. But there are people that are trying to work within those systems to make them better. And so I would challenge those folks to remember your why. And, you know, we have to do that in our work as well when things get tough. Remember your why. Because the hopeful part of me has to believe that you did this job to do good things to people, to help people. So let's get back to that.
Man, I have to say, I don't think we're going to get anything better than that.
No.
Yeah, I feel like that's a ball drop. Yeah, we should.
Remember your why.
Yeah.
I'm going to be saying that now.
Mic drop.
Well, quote me on the next show when you have other folks
I was
on.
going to say, remember your
Well,
why.
I've always said, remember your why.
Yeah, you have to, right?
That's always.
I mean, you know.
I say it all the time.
Yes.
Chriselle knows. I'm
Yes.
constantly.
Chriselle
So
knows.
now we can say Stella's words right out of her mouth.
There you
Yeah,
go.
I always say, remember your why. My gosh, it's exhausting hearing me say it. So I'm glad you.
Sounds like you have to remember it at least a couple times a week, right? Like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Yeah.
Think alike. I'll steal Sap's
It goes
thing,
both
too.
ways. Well, thank you so much, Sap.
Thank y'all for having me.
Lauren.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lauren Sap.
Even my dad's in the room. I want to give him a shout out, Jack Sapp. My family calls me Sapp, so it's
Okay,
it's
Sap.
just, it is what it is.
We're not
so.
alone. and quickly, sorry, before we go into our closing, just we always do this for any nonprofit organization, whatever.
Yes.
Y'all accept money?
We definitely do. We
So-
are a fully grant-funded organization, right? So a lot of the screenings I talk about with our Farmline documentary and Plantation Prisons, we present that to funders who are passionate about our cause.
Right.
Everything we do, making the films, litigation, representing clients, hiring experts, our organizers, putting on lobby days, it all costs money. We
Costs
take no
money.
federal funding, and we're fully grant funded. And so if you want to be an individual donor and support the Promise of Justice Initiative, your dollars will go to freedom and dignity and joy.
Oh my, hard to fight that type of
Because I
investment.
think,
So-
my dollars don't have that.
Yeah. Man,
They
I
can
know.
use that. They can use it.
Look in your wallet and ask, where else are you investing in that?
Yes.
So, okay, great.
Well, that wraps up today's episode of the Monitor's Mic. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all our listeners for tuning in and staying engaged with the crucial conversations we're having about police oversight and community safety. Thank you so much, Lauren Sapp from PJI, for joining us today on the Monitor's Mic. It was really great to see you. Again, it's been too long. We appreciate you sharing your experiences and lessons learned through your work in the criminal legal system in New Orleans, and we thank you for all you have done. So if you missed any part of today's show or want to catch up on past episodes, please visit our website at www.nolaipm.gov. You can find and follow us on YouTube at NOLA IPM, and you can follow us on social media for updates and news on Instagram at NOLA OIPM and on Facebook, the New Orleans Independent Police Monitor. So until next time, I want you all to stay informed, stay involved, and stay committed to building a safer community. And this has been the Monitor's Mic.